Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the GRIPS Forum. My name is Izumi Ono, Professor of the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, GRIPS, based in Tokyo. I specialize in international development policy and will be serving as a moderator today. GRIPS Forum aims at informing policy debates by inviting various leaders in the field. It is a public event. At the same time, gives our students opportunities to join and learn from such global leaders. Today, I am pleased to invite Dr. Keiichi Tsunekawa, Professor Emeritus of National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, GRIPS, and University of Tokyo. Dr. Tsunekawa is a leading Japanese scholar in the field of international political economy, and I'm sure many people know him very well. He was vice president of the GRIPS during 2011 to 2013, and also served as the first director of JICA Research Institute during 2008 to 2010, now renamed as JICA Ogata Sadako Research Institute for Peace and Development. He has a deep knowledge and extensive research experience in such areas as comparative politics, democratization, and economic development in emerging economies and developing countries. Today, Dr. Tsunekawa will give a talk based on his recent publication, including Emerging States at Crossroads from Springer 2019, and Will the Emerging States Change the World in Japanese, which is really published very recently from Chuo Koronsha as a shinsho. Since the 21st century, the presence of emerging economy countries has become increasingly significant in the world economy and politics. Their rise is taking place along with a relative decline of G7 share of the world economy, which has fallen about 70% in the late 1980s to about 40% now. The initiation of the G20 summit in the 2008 after the Lehman shock financial crisis is a symbolic example in this regard. At the same time, it should be noted that emerging economy countries are quite diverse in terms of political regimes, values, and interest. They also face country-specific development challenges, for example, to cope with middle-income traps, energy transition, social inclusion, etc. Regrettably, today we live in an increasingly divided world, as exacerbated by Russia-Ukraine war. In this complex landscape with profound changes in global power balance, the role of the emerging economies countries are critically important. So what are the economic political characteristics of the emerging economic countries? Where are they heading? What does their rise mean for the entire world? And what role Japan should play to build a peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable world? Today, we will learn these important issues from Dr. Tsunekawa. The topic of his lecture is the advent of emerging economy countries, challenge for Japan. After 45 minutes lecture, we will have panel discussions inviting GRIPS experts, and after that, we will have open Q&A session with a wider audience. So we encourage you to use raise hand function to join our discussion by showing your face preferably, or alternatively, you can post your questions in the Q&A box. Presentation and discussion in the session will be on the record. So please welcome Dr. Tsunekawa, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much, Professor Ono, for introducing me to the viewers. Good afternoon and hello, everybody. Today, I will talk about the challenges for Japan brought by the advent of emerging economy countries in the world. I will argue that the importance of these countries has been enhancing both politically and economically. So now let me share the PowerPoint slides with you. Please wait for a second. Okay. This is the structure of today's presentation of mine. In the first part of my presentation, I will identify EeCs. EeCs are abbreviation of emerging economy countries. So I will identify EeCs by focusing on the economic growth rates and the size of their GDP. I will also discuss they achieved a rapid growth by closely connecting with the world market. I will also point out that maintaining a high level of economic growth continues to be crucial for the leaders of the EeCs so that they can stay in power. In the second section, I will move on the theme of political transformation of these countries. Most of them had authoritarian regimes before the middle of the 1980s, but got involved in the wave of democratization in the following 20 to 25 years. The speed of democratization slowed down significantly in the 21st century, but after receiving the baptism of democratization, the leaders of EeCs today are required to be sensitive to the aspirations of the people, even under authoritarian regimes. The third section is concerned with military build-up pursued by EeCs. Some of them have also enhanced overseas military activities and affected the geopolitical environment of the world. The spread of military action by some of the EeCs pressed Japan to make a prompt response, because these actions are diametrically contradictory to the liberal internationalist principles, which Japan has been accustomed to for the past 70 years. How to respond to the new international situation is the theme of the fourth and the fifth parts of my presentation. And I will conclude here. Japan faces serious risks stemming from possible economic decoupling and the political military surge of the statist-unilateralist trend. The latter is diametrically opposite to liberal internationalism that Japan endorses as principles governing the world. To cope with these challenges, Japan needs to seriously consider how to use its limited resources to reach out to and develop closer ties with the EeCs. EeCs are countries which belonged to global south in 1980s, but achieved a rapid economic growth in the following 30 years and attained the GDP that is big enough to be internationally influential. I identified 29 EeCs here and divided them into two groups, especially high growth countries and ordinarily high growth countries. But I quickly add, there are many other countries here which have achieved equally rapid growth, although their GDP is not yet big enough. I call them next EeCs. Here, after this, there are another African countries like Botswana and Mozambique. And some of the EeCs like Singapore and South Korea have already reached the high-income country status. And some others like China and Russia have become big international powers, challenging US hegemony globally or regionally. Now, let me see how their economy grew. There are 4 different patterns of development. In order to visually grasp patterns of economic development, I elaborated an indicator named CASB, comparative advantage measured by sectoral value added in export. To get this CASB, you first divide value added in export in certain economic sector by value added in the whole export. You calculate it for certain country here on the one hand, and for the whole world on the other, and divide the result of certain country by the result of the whole world. If the result of that country is greater than the one for the whole world, it means that that country is competitive in that industrial sector, I sector, because it means the country can export products with higher local contents to the world. Now look at some examples. Saudi Arabia. As you see here clearly, Saudi Arabia is highly competitive here. Mining and extractive primary goods. Of course, this is petroleum sector, but very weak in all other sectors except chemicals, non-metallics. This is petrochemical industry. Saudi Arabia has tried to develop this petrochemical industry, but unfortunately, the Saudi Arabia still, the competitiveness of this sector. Where is my pointer? Yeah, this sector is more or less the same level as world average. One is world average. So the Saudi Arabia provides a very typical example of economic growth based on the export of natural resources. South Korea demonstrates a totally different pattern of development. Its competitiveness is fully dependent on here, manufacturing industries, especially machinery industries, like electrical products production and transport equipment industry. Chile. Chile represents the third type of development. It is competitive in primary goods, both agricultural and mining here, but it is even more competitive in food processing and metal products. These sectors are processing industries which use local natural resources. This is a typical case of natural resource-based processing industry-led growth. And Singapore is competitive in electronic and electrical products like in South Korea, but it is even more competitive in financial service sector. So Singapore represents the pattern of development based on business supporting service sector. But many countries, many EeCs grew economically by somehow combining these four patterns of development. For instance, China is strong in agricultural primary goods, textile, but these sectors, competitiveness of these sectors is declining. But China is also now stronger in manufacturing, other manufacturing sectors, especially electronic and electrical products. Of course, this CASB, use export, value added in export. So the countries like China, which has very large domestic market, the growth also depends on the production within the country, so domestic production. This does not show the whole story of the growth, but still this survey can tell you where is the international competitiveness of each country. Finally, India. India is strong in agricultural primary goods and textile industry, but India, the peculiarity of India is the strength in ICT services. This is software production and other ICT-based business support sector. Now, this is the table of economic growth rates of EeCs. EeCs grew economically between 1991 and 2014 much faster than the high-income countries like the United States and Japan, 4.6% average. After 2015, the economic growth of EeCs, including China, slowed down. China, well, the growth rate is still high, but declined. Brazil, South Africa experienced further decline. But Vietnam, India, Bangladesh, those countries I call latecomers. Latecomers are doing better. They continue to grow after 2015. I said latecomers because if you look at this is GNI per capita. Those are the lower middle income countries, and those indicate upper middle income countries. So lower middle income countries are still growing continuously, but this means that those countries may also experience slowing down of economic growth after they reached the upper middle income level. These figures show the results of an authoritative international opinion survey named World Values Survey. The figures indicate the shares of the respondents to this question, which, let me show this first. Okay, this is average. The four questions, the question is this: which among the four is the top priority for your country in the next 10 years? So the four goals are: first, high level of economic growth; second, stronger defense forces; third, greater share of people in jobs and communities. This is a greater democracy; and more beautiful cities and countryside. This is environmental protection. So, in total, 24 EeCs were covered by this opinion survey. And in 23 out of 24, this option, high level of economic growth, was chosen as a top priority. That, between those two periods, stronger defense forces as a national goal increased, while the economic growth declined. This reflects, the change of the international geopolitical environment, and the ordinary people already feel it. But still, this option, high level of economic growth, continued to be the highest choice as the most important national goal in next 10 years among the EeCs people. Well, see. Thailand, is a typical country in which people emphasize high economic growth in next 10 years. Although Thailand experienced very, confused civil strife over democracy, the people apparently is losing the interest in democracy and now interested more in economic growth. By the way, again, this the democracy and environment, people's interest remains almost the same, okay? This is average, but China is different. China is the only country in which more recently the people who choose stronger defense forces as the top priority of their country was greater than the people who chose high level of economic growth. This is higher than this. China is the only country. And of course, this reflects the heightening tension of China's relationship with the United States in that moment. This survey was taken in China in 2018, the Trump period. Well, Japan, the peculiarity of Japan, well, Japan also, the people chose economic growth as a top priority, although it declined, and people who chose stronger defense forces increased. So the pattern is the same as EeCs, but the peculiarity of Japan is here. People who chose more democracy increased. This is quite different from EeC pattern. So on the one hand, many EeCs face slower economic growth recently. On the other hand, people in these countries, regardless if their government is democratic or authoritarian, expect the continuation of high economic growth. It means that even in the authoritarian states, the legitimacy of political leaders is based on the delivery of material benefits to the people. The good example is the white paper movement or blank paper movement in China, which occurred last November, protesting economic difficulties caused by the highly restrictive coronavirus containment policy. To conclude this first section, the first high economic growth of the EeCs was based on their close connections with the world market. Second, the modes of their participation in the world market are multiple. Natural resources, machinery industries, resource processing industries, business support services, or the combination thereof. Third, the economies slowed down significantly after 2015, although latecomers are doing better for now. People in the EeCs eagerly hope their countries will continue a high level of economic growth in next 10 years. Now, let me move to the issue of political transformation of the EeCs. This slide shows how the EeCs have changed the nature of their political regime over time. The arrow indicates the average direction of change of 29 EeCs. This is average of 29 countries. Here I use two indicators, Freedom House and Polity Need 2, to measure the degree of democracy and autocracy. But as you see in the figure, the two indicators show more or less the same patterns of political transformation of the EeCs. Most of the EeCs used to be governed by authoritarian regimes before the mid-1980s. So this was a starting point. They got involved in the wave of democratization in the following 3 decades, although the speed of democratization shown by the length of the arrow, the speed of the democratization slowed down over time. In recent 5 years here, the direction of transformation reversed from democratization to re-authoritarianization. But the previous slide only shows the average of 29 EeCs. Like economic development, there are several patterns in political transformation. So let's see. some countries didn't change their political regime over time. Endurance cases, 3 types. India, here, stayed as democracy over time. Saudi Arabia stays as autocracy all the time, and Singapore in the middle, semi-authoritarian regime it maintained. But there are 3 patterns of regime change. Some, like South Korea, stayed as democracy here, stayed as democracy after transition. It democratized in this period and stayed there. So this is a successful case of democratization. But some, like Russia, reversed, it also democratized here, but reversed to the direction of authoritarianism. So this is a typical case of reversal of democracy. And the third type of change, regime change, like Nigeria, it stayed as semi here. Nigeria started democratization not during the 1980s, but 1990s, but democratized to some extent, and stayed as a middle range, as semi-authoritarian regime. So this is a third type of change. But the general trend was, as we saw in the previous slide, the first, a sharp democratization, then slowing down of democratization, the resurgence of authoritarian regimes. That's a general trend of EeCs. To summarize, these are 6 patterns of political transformation, 3 endurance cases and 3 transformation cases. And I will argue that endurance cases were rare here, minority. Second, the general trend of slowing down of democratization and authoritarian reversal is mostly explained by which? Those 5 countries, reversal countries. And the economic conditions, in this case, different growth rates, 2 groups, compare 2 groups. This difference explains neither regime endurance, these cases, regime endurance cases, equal number of countries are distributed. So different growth rate doesn't matter. Also, the case of democracy after transition, this difference also is not explained by different economic growth rate. But authoritarian reversal, this one, and semi-democratization, these cases, these phenomena happen mostly in relatively low growth countries. Bangladesh was the only exception, very high growth country, but experienced the reversal of authoritarian, democratic regime. So in order to explain the difference between those cases, reversal cases, and endurance after democratization cases, this difference, economically, at least growth rates are more or less similar. So in order to explain this difference, we probably need to see political conditions. So what are the political conditions? I don't have time to, to analyze political transformation of each country, but my findings are here. The factors which brought about authoritarian reversal after transition are mainly 2. First, the ruling groups or rulers felt seriously threatened by the rise of lower status people or political opposition under democracy. So those traditional groups support the authoritarian reversal. The second case is people were disappointed by insufficient improvement of their living conditions or by political instability, corruption under democracy. So people, support the leaders who tried to re-establish authoritarian regime. But the factors facilitating endurance of democracy after transition are first, the recognition of long-term no-winner situation led to compromised acceptance of democracy. If there is a no-winner situation, there is a conflict. There are many conflicts, but in that conflict, no one can win, and many people recognize that no-winner situation. Then that situation might lead to the acceptance of democracy. The second case is the memory of authoritarian atrocities made people accept democracy as a lesser of the two evils. So those factors, about reversal and endurance, what do they say about the democracy? I would say that leaders and people need to be recognized the desirability or inevitability of democracy through their own long-term experiences. So lecturing the superiority of democracy from outside does not help. So after 30 years of transformation, we have 13 democracies, 8 authoritarian regimes, and 5 semi-authoritarian regimes. And these 3 probably should be called semi-democracies. To conclude this section, many EeCs got involved in the wave of democratization in 3 decades after the mid-1980s. But the speed of democratization slowed down significantly in the 21st century. Still, the number of democratic countries is greater than the one of authoritarian countries, and even the authoritarian countries have experience of democratization in some time during this period. Now, third section. Some of the EeCs have used their increasing economic resources for military build-up. Actually, only 5. Those 5 countries significantly expanded military expenditure relative to the US expenditures. This is, USA 100. The rest of the EeCs, they maintained more or less a similar level of spending over time. So those 5 countries are a big spender of military resources. The numbers in parentheses, those numbers indicate the ranking in the world of general military capability of the country. So Russia second, China third. How do these EeCs use their newly found military capability? Here is a list of their military activities in recent years. China and Russia are especially active. Aggressive military activities of China and Russia press Japan to respond promptly because China and Russia are Japan's immediate neighbors. In contrast, the United States is far away from the 2 countries. Europe has a common border with Russia, but not with China. Japan is the only major country that stands face-to-face with the 2 militarily aggressive countries. In addition, a new kind of world order is now seemingly promoted by China and Russia. It would jeopardize the liberal internationalism, which Japan and the Japanese are so much accustomed to in the last 70 years. When the World War II ended, the Japanese deeply reflected on the disastrous past of wars and authoritarian rules. Consequently, Japan adopted liberal internationalism as the principles by which to live in the post-war world. So what is a liberal internationalism? Liberal internationalism respects individual citizens' rights and freedom. Under liberal internationalism, national sovereignty is based on citizens' agreement. So this indicates democracy. It respects market-based economic management and international laws and agreements. And liberal internationalism promotes the solution of international conflicts by peaceful means. But in recent years, China and Russia seem to put forward a different kind of principles for the management of the world. I name it statist unilateralism. Under this new principles, judgment by enlightened state leaders overrides citizens' rights and freedom. National sovereignty is defined by state rulers. It accepts large economic roles for the public sector, and the matters of vital national interests, again defined by the state rulers, override international laws and agreements. It allows a military solution for international conflicts. So statist unilateralism is diametrically opposite to liberal internationalism as principles that govern the world. Okay, I prepared this table just to show how Japan is salient in terms of people's political inclination to liberal internationalism. The figures show the share of respondents who agree to various statements. The first statement is this: for the sake of national interest, individual interest could be sacrificed. So many people in East Asian countries, by the way, this is the result of public opinion survey named Asian Barometer. Many people in East Asian countries support this statement. So national interest is much more important than individual interests. But only 17% of Japanese accepted this statement. Second column, the question is, for the sake of citizens should always remain loyal only to his or her country, no matter how imperfect it is or what wrong it has done. So this indicates unconditional national loyalty. Again, many people in East Asian countries supported this statement, but only 30%. Well, South Koreans are also very low. But in Japan, 30% of people accepted this statement. Third column, the question is, we should get rid of parliament and elections and have a strong leader decide things. So this is support of autocracy, and lower percentage of people support this statement even in East Asian countries, but even lower percentage of people supported this in Japan. Finally, the final question is, statement is, if we have political leaders who are morally upright, we can let them decide everything. So support to virtuous leader. Again, high share of people in East Asian countries support virtuous leader, but only 31% of Japanese support this statement. So Japan is lowest in almost all indicators, and it shows that Japanese people have conspicuously democratic inclination domestically and least nationalist internationally. But here, let me emphasize that both liberal internationalism and statist unilateralism are principles, not values. Values are something deeply internalized in people's mind and do not change easily. Principles are concerned with generally applicable rules. Principles tolerate exceptions. They are also variable, changeable. For instance, the United States is usually regarded as a defender of liberal internationalism, but Mr. Trump deviated from it by unilaterally quitting from the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, and by imposing extraordinary tariffs on imports, even from its close allies like Japan. Before Trump, President Bush Jr. launched a military attack on Iraq without international agreement. Today, China and Russia do not hesitate to use military power against their neighbors. They also accept a large role played by state enterprises and banks. In that sense, China and Russia are statist unilateralists. However, they remain the liberal internationalist world in certain issue areas. For instance, they do not decouple themselves from the world economy, at least from their side. They, especially China, cooperate with other countries for the global issues like climate change. Nevertheless, it is clear today that the liberal internationalist principles Japan has relied on are seriously challenged by statist unilateralism, mainly endorsed by China and Russia. And Japan cannot look on idly doing nothing about the spread of statist unilateralism in the world. Why? First, it badly affects Japanese nationals and businesses. Allow me to give just one example. 1 month ago, a Japanese business person working for a pharmaceutical company was arrested by the Chinese security authorities on allegation of spying. Arrest itself is not a problem. This person might be really guilty in violating Chinese laws. The problem is the lack of transparency and a highly authoritarian regime. He was blamed for spying, but no details of charge is provided by the Chinese authority, and he is kept in custody. This is not the first such case. Since 2015, 17 Japanese nationals were arrested in China. They were kept in custody for a long time. 5 were released without prosecution, but 9 were sentenced to jail. 1 of them died there. In addition, 1 Japanese citizen is currently being tried in the court, and 2 others are in detention centers waiting for prosecution. If statist unilateralism dominates the world, I'm afraid that this kind of human rights violation spreads all over the world and seriously affects Japanese nationals and businesses. Second, there is another more serious risk. If military solution is accepted for international conflicts, Japan may be involved in military clash nearby in the Taiwan Strait, East China Sea, and even in northern seas. But what is the stance of EeCs with regard to the 2 sets of principles of the world order? China and Russia, they have moved to the direction of statist unilateralism. And Japan is located here. But how about other EeCs? As I pointed out in the first part of my presentation, the rapid economic growth of the EeCs became possible thanks to their close connections with the world economy. Most of them, probably except for China and India, do not have a big enough domestic market. So for the future growth, they need to be continuously connected with the world market. Except for China and Russia, neither do they have big enough military power that would allow them to engage in unilateral military action. So most of the EeCs are internationalists, both politically and economically. However, as I said in the second part of my presentation, part of the EeCs are governed by authoritarian or semi-authoritarian regimes domestically. They don't like to be lectured about the desirability of democracy. At the same time, political leaders in both democratic and authoritarian countries are now under strong social pressure for continuous provision of material benefits to the people, and that needs further economic growth. Consequently, the leaders of EeCs attempt to obtain as many economic benefits as possible from their relations with both liberal internationalist countries and statist unilateralist countries. So their stance here are very vague, close to the center line. So most of the EeCs do not participate in the economic sanctions against Russia, even though they oppose the unilateral Russian action against Ukraine. In this kind of situation, what does Japan need to do in order to defend the liberal internationalist world order for its own sake? I don't pretend to have definite answers, but I believe that cooperation with global South countries, especially the EeCs and next EeCs, is crucial for Japan. Why? First, to cope with possible decoupling of the world economy, Japan needs to diversify value chain of its industries by developing closer ties with EeCs and next EeCs to reduce excessive dependence on China and the United States. Second, to counter the statist-unilateralist trend, Japan needs to cooperate with EeCs and next EeCs so that these countries can continue to develop economically, and consequently, their political leaders are not lured into authoritarian nationalist path. The third and the biggest challenge for Japan is in Japan itself, limitations of its material capabilities. Let's see. Well, but I'm afraid to say that many Japanese still dream a happy dream of the past success and are not sufficiently conscious of difficulties Japan faces domestically and internationally, and of the necessity to strengthen our relations with the EeCs. But let's see the limitations of Japan. The available public sector resources are increasingly limited. Public sector debt, this is both for central and local governments, exceeds 200% of GDP. On the issues, this is only for central government, and the share of, where's my point? Share of general account revenue exceeds 30% of the budget. And debt payment, this is share of expenditure, 22%. So Japanese government borrowed this percentage of the budget and spend 22% just to repay the past debt. Social welfare expanded to a great extent here. Public works declined, but defense, although it is said that Japan needs to, to strengthen the defense capability, but the budget stayed more or less the same. ODA declined, both as percent of expenditure and percent of GDP. Private sector of Japan is doing better. The FDI stock increased to a great extent as percent of GDP, and also increased as percent of world total. But what is worrying is Japanese economy. The cash pay of Japan shows certain weakness of Japanese economy. Japan is strong in machinery industries, but electrical products and transport equipment sector, the competitiveness is declining, although the other machinery, it is increasing. But what is worrying more is the weakness of the business support services here. These are the sectors which are very important to support the future economic growth. But unfortunately, Japan is weak. Okay, so in the face of these limitations, Japan needs to use limited public resources wisely and by considering the order of priority. How? First, resources should be used to contribute to economic development of the EeCs by focusing on the improvement of their economic and social infrastructure and human capital. Second, resources should be used to assist Japanese companies to be innovative and to diversify their value chain into the EC. And third, Japan should enhance the acceptance of foreign human resources and improve the treatment of these people to overcome the aging low birth rate problem in Japan itself. Finally, I want to add that Japan can contribute to the EECs by offering experience-based knowledge about the issues like healthcare and disaster management. And GRIPS will be able to provide excellent programs on these issues and many other issues. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tsunekawa sensei, for really excellent presentation with a solid analysis as always, and also objective assessment of Japanese situation, and also maybe role of GRIPS, which may be able to play in the human resource development. Thank you so much.